everyone. It's my pleasure to join you in celebrating this year's recipients of the Eleanor Roosevelt Prize for Global Human Rights Advancement. Each has made historic contributions to the long-term advancement of human rights in the United States and around the world. Our honorees are Dr. Anthony Fauci for his unparalleled expertise and lifelong dedication to advancing public health, which have been so crucial to confronting the COVID-19 pandemic. Billie Jean King for her indispensable work to advance equality and women's empowerment as we mark this year the centennial of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which secured women's suffrage. And Nasrin Sotoudeh, the renowned human rights lawyer who has put her own life and liberty on the line to vindicate universal human rights in Iran. With the blessing of the Roosevelt family, the American Bar Association's Center for Human Rights in 2018 established this award. The Eleanor Roosevelt Prize recognizes individuals and organizations that have had a positive and enduring impact in service to the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which Mrs. Roosevelt famously championed. Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, was not a lawyer herself, yet her work was central to shaping the foundation of modern international human rights law. Her leadership brought together brilliant minds representing divergent perspectives, opinions, cultures, and personalities. Our 2020 Roosevelt honorees are similarly brilliant and have made extraordinary contributions in their respective fields, all to humanity's betterment. Congratulations, honorees, on receiving this important recognition, and thank you for advancing the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We appreciate the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation for so generously serving as our 2020 presenting sponsor. And we are extraordinarily proud of the ABA Center for Human Rights for its enduring work to advance human rights and justice worldwide. Thank you all for joining us for this important event. By bearing witness to the brilliance and bravery of those we honor here, may each of us be inspired to work toward a more just and perfect world.
Hello, I'm Ian McDougall, Executive Vice President and General Counsel for LexisNexis and President of the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation. Firstly, I hope this video message finds you and your families safe and well. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to join the chair of the ABA Center for Human Rights, the Honorable James A. Wynne Jr., and ABA President Patricia Lee Rifo in congratulating the 2020 Eleanor Roosevelt Prize for Global Human Rights Advancement, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Many of you may be familiar with the incredible work of Dr. Fauci in advancing the human right to health in the US and around the globe, beginning with the fighting of the HIV/AIDS pandemic and then Ebola. After this extraordinary year, we're all familiar with his outstanding work relating to COVID-19, and especially with his ability and willingness to work collaboratively with disparate populations. From time to time, every nation has an emergency of one kind or another to face. It tests all aspects of that nation, the people, the facilities, the finances, And very occasionally, it also tests a commitment to the rule of law. I can't overstate the fact that the rule of law is not just a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity. Let's remember that the rule of law is the crucial building block for any society to be stable and prosper. Without the rule of law, there is no prosperity. The vulnerable in society are left behind or oppressed. Without the rule of law, a nation's prosperity declines, human rights are abandoned, and social order eventually breaks down. It is as inevitable a consequence of the lack of the rule of law as is the certainty that the sun will rise tomorrow. And speaking of the sun rising tomorrow, let's also remember that a crisis passes. So it will be for this COVID-19 crisis. The terror of the moment recedes into history, as we can see from the first vaccines being rolled out as we speak. But when it does pass, it's crucial that the rule of law remains strong in its wake. Society is built on the foundations of the rule of law, and if, following this crisis, we are still left with a strong commitment to the rule of law, we will have strong foundations upon which to recover and build prosperity for all members of the community. Advancing the rule of law around the world is our fundamental purpose as a company. And around the world, the rule of law is under threat like never before. Some of you may have heard me speak about why we at LexisNexis feel it's important to support awards such as this prestigious Eleanor Roosevelt Prize for Global Human Rights Advancement. Unfortunately, it seems that each year when I say a few words at awards presentations like this, my words have been ones of increasing alarm, not decreasing. 2020 presented even greater challenges. The UN estimates that a staggering 5 billion people around the world currently live outside the umbrella protections of the rule of law. We all need to take a stand with and follow the examples of today's outstanding honoree. I'll conclude by reminding myself and all of you of a quote from Sir Winston Churchill. He said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. When you give, you're fulfilling your highest duty in this life, and it will bring you the utmost fulfillment." This year's Eleanor Roosevelt Prize for Global Human Rights Advancement honoree, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has shown us all by his determination, courage, and skill that it's possible to make a difference for everyone and to change the world for the better. For the award, on behalf of the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation, I congratulate him. And for his commitment, I thank him.
My name is Dr. Tony Fauci. I'm the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at NIH.
Noted public health scholars were opining and even testifying before the United States Congress that with the advent of antibiotics and vaccines and public health measures, quote, the war against infectious diseases had been won. At that time, I was on my way to begin, of all things, a fellowship in infectious diseases at the National Institutes of Health. I sort of felt like I was going to Miami to be a ski instructor.
Before this malady even had a name, it had a fierce opponent in Dr. Anthony Fauci.
This is a new disease, at least in the United States.
It just struck me as an oddity that otherwise healthy men and another oddity, otherwise healthy gay men, got an infection that you virtually never see in someone with a normal immune system. And at that point, it was like, oh my God, we're dealing with something new.
I decided I was going to stop what I had been doing and devote myself completely to studying what I felt would be an enormously difficult disease. And it unfortunately turned out that that was the case.
I think you have to...
Start that business about science isn't done that way. I'm going to come down there and slap your face.
All right, Larry, hang on for a second.
Remarkably, He has gone from being burned in effigy by AIDS activists in the early days of the epidemic to winning their trust and respect.
You know, I want to say something about Tony Fauci, because I think the world must think I hate him or something, the way I'm going on tonight. I love Tony. Actually, I think I probably have a more complicated relationship with Tony than anybody in my entire life. He is a man, an ordinary man, who is being asked to play God, and he is being punished because he cannot be God. And that is a terrible situation to be in, to be the lightning rod for all of us. But he is there, and he has been this incredible fighter for us and for AIDS.
I love you, Larry.
Who are the ones that you would point out to young Americans as figures who should inspire this country?
I think of Dr. Fauci. Probably never heard of him. Well, you did. Ann heard him. He's a very fine research, top doctor at National Institute of Health, working hard doing something about research on this disease of AIDS.
Dr. Anthony S. Fauci has advised 6 presidents on domestic and global health issues. His decades of work has saved millions of lives throughout the world. He's helped pioneer the field of human immune regulation and has made seminal contributions to developing treatments that enable people to live long and active lives. Yet, as indebted as we all are to Dr. Fauci for his career-long dedication to excellence and his extraordinary scientific expertise, what inspired the Center for Human Rights to honor him with the 2020 Eleanor Roosevelt Prize are his ability and willingness to work collaboratively with disparate populations and advocates who have been directly and intimately affected by global pandemics, appreciating the human dimensions of their experience. Such infinity, combined with immovable determination to improve the human condition, characterized Eleanor Roosevelt's career as well, culminating her work to enshrine human rights principles in modern international law. Despite her not being a lawyer, in our view, these qualities are also what makes Dr. Fauci a human rights advocate, and a great one at that. Therefore, on behalf of Tracy Roosevelt and Walter H. White Jr., who are the co-chairs of the Eleanor Roosevelt Prize, and the entire board of the American Bar Association Center for Human Rights, I am honored to present the 2020 Eleanor Roosevelt Prize for Global Human Rights Advancement to Dr. Anthony S. Fauci. Dr. Fauci, thank you for your service to the United States, to global public health, and to the advancement of human rights as envisioned in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which Eleanor Roosevelt championed. Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Thank you very much, Judge Wynn. This such an extraordinary honor, and I'm very humbled by it, particularly because, as you said, my long-standing interest in human rights dating back from my early years during the very beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, when human rights became such an important issue in a disease that was characterized by stigma in society among a disenfranchised group. And particularly since Eleanor Roosevelt has been one of my true heroines ever since I was in school. I've been very inspired by how this woman was such a champion for this rights, and to be given an award that is named after her is particularly moving and meaningful for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you again, Dr. Fauci. And if you don't mind, I'd like to ask just a few questions.
Sure.
Chat a bit. Let me begin with a question of, like Eleanor Roosevelt, you have demonstrated over the many decades a deep determination to improve the human condition. As distinct from its purely scientific dimensions, what drives your work from a human perspective?
Well, you know, Judge Wynn, I have, from my training in medicine, but also even my classics training in college and even in high school, studying, I was a humanities major, Greek classics history major. So I took a course that was not a typical medical training. I was much more interested in the human condition, not only the physical human condition that relates to medicine, but also everything about the human species and the idea of the rights of humans, particularly rights to health, rights to happiness, rights to freedom. Those were things that have always been embedded in my identity as a physician. And I try to realize and promote both of those things as I practice medicine. So that's the reason why I said just a moment ago why it's so meaningful for me to receive an award like this, because human rights has been such an important part of the diseases that I've actually had to encounter as a global health individual. The things like the lack of access to health care among certain segments of our population, or the lack of access to ordinarily accessible medicines on the part of people in developing nations who don't have the kinds of privileges that we have in a rich world. All of that is intertwined with human rights. I mean, right from the very beginning, with the stigma associated with HIV, human rights became such an important part of everything that we did in medicine with regard to HIV. So I'm familiar with it and very much connected to it.
Doctor, I've read extensively about you, including a book, I think it was entitled Fauci, in which does chronicle your great career, an interesting career. And now you've led this institute for many decades. How do you conceive your role as both a government official who's beholden to political realities of government service, and yet as a scientist who's dedicated to data-driven truth? How do you view those two roles?
Well, I view them as potentially and in reality totally compatible. But sometimes, as you see, when you get involved, particularly as we are now today in a very divisive society, in a very much of a politicization of a global health issue such as COVID-19, you have to be especially careful to separate anything that's has to do with political ideology from the policies that you make regarding domestic and global health. Because once you intertwine the two, they become then incompatible, because health, human rights, science and medicine are without ideology. They should be taken in and of themselves, regardless of the political ideology of any given administration or any given political party or partisanship. And when you're in government, sometimes it's difficult to separate those two. But if you are steadfast in making sure that the main motivating force of what you do, for me as a scientist and a physician, is medicine, science, the truth, evidence, and data, and not things that get mixed up in political issues. And fortunately, I've been able to successfully navigate that over the years.
So, Doctor, a great part of this audience is, of course, lawyers and judges and legal minds out here. Tell me about your experience with law and lawyers over the course of your public health career.
Well, my experience with lawyers, I know sometimes some people have unfortunate experience with lawyers. Mine has been really very positive, because I have seen the side of law that stands up for the health and the rights of people, many of whom are my patients. I have seen lawyers back in, again, and I keep using a reference that is very much ingrained in my experience, is that of the early years of HIV/AIDS, where with the discrimination and the stigma, and how many lawyers pro bono came to the rescue of people who were discriminated against, who were stigmatized against merely on the basis of their sexual preference or on the basis of the disease that they had. So my experience with lawyers has been one that they are really champions of human rights in the arena in which I find myself. And also, even lawyers at the international level, when you have international law of global health, I mean, things like, I've learned a lot from my friend and colleague, Larry Gostin, who's an expert on international law when it has to do with global health. So my experiences have been extremely positive.
Well, that is wonderful to hear. Hey, we have a number of young people who are on board, and some may want to go in different fields. What advice do you have for young people who wish to pursue careers in public health law and policy?
Well, if you have even the slightest inkling that this is something that you would be interested in, the opportunities to do good on a broader scale are extraordinary. So, you know, that kind of profession is not for everyone, but I'm sure that there are a number of young people who look at the possibility of law in the context of global health and in the context of the broader issues that have to do with health. Since health, at least in my mind, is a human right, the right to a healthy life, that when you have that right to something, often you need advocates to help you exercise that right. And that's where lawyers who are dedicated to that come in. So if this is something that interests you, come on in. We need you.
Now, Dr. Fauci, more than anyone else I can think of, your word has become so important in this important time of our history, in which we're dealing with this COVID-19 experience. What lessons do you take from this COVID-19 experience in terms of being prepared for future pandemics and minimizing their impact?
Well, we should always have lessons learned when we go through a particular difficult experience or even something that's a bona fide crisis, the way we're doing now. Because what we're going through, you know, I don't want to scare people, but it really is the most devastating pandemic that we've experienced in over 100 years, since the infamous pandemic of 1918, the so-called Spanish flu. So the lessons learned would be for next time that outbreaks occur, we need to be prepared. We were actually quite prepared for this one, but it is such a devastating pandemic, it even superseded some of our best preparations. The other lesson learned is when you're dealing with an outbreak like this, you've got to take political and ideological considerations off the table. Because as we know now from the sad experience that what we've been through, there has been such divisiveness in society that it's actually interfered in so many respects with the most optimal response to the outbreak, where people had things like the wearing of masks be a political statement that should never have happened. Those are things that are purely public health. They should never have gotten mixed up in the divisiveness which is so prevalent in our society.
Dr. Fauci, this particular virus, if I might add, has beyond question affected certain populations more so than others. How do we go about preparing in the future for vulnerable populations? How can we, perhaps with messaging in terms of different messages to them, but also from a scientific perspective of helping them to prepare to be less vulnerable to this?
Well, I think the messaging and things like that are important, but the thing that I have found, Judge Wynn, that's really, really critical is that we have experienced the inequities in health and the disparate suffering in diseases that minority populations have suffered, everything from HIV, AIDS, where 13% of the population is African American and 45% of the population, 45% of the new cases are among African Americans, 65% of them among gay African Americans, and 75% of them among gay men who have sex with men African Americans. So clearly, there's a disparity of suffering among minorities. We're seeing that absolutely with COVID-19, where African Americans, Latinx, Native Americans, Alaskan natives, and Pacific Islanders, the minorities in our society, not only have a higher incidence of COVID-19 infection because of the nature of the jobs that they find themselves in out in the community exposed, but once they do get infected, the underlying comorbidities, the underlying conditions, medical conditions for which they suffer are disproportionate among these populations, and particularly among the African Americans. You talk about things like hypertension, kidney disease, obesity, diabetes, things like that. So if ever there's going to be something that jolts us into realizing that the social determinants of health are the things that drive the disproportionate suffering among minority populations. It's not racial at all. It has to do with the social determinants of health, the positions you find yourself in, the economic status, the diet that is made available to you from the time that you're a young individual. Those are the things that we have to do something about. And I hope that when COVID-19 is behind us, which it will be within a reasonable period of time, we'll be looking at it through the rear view mirror sometime within a reasonable period of time, that we should not forget that this yet again emphasized for us the extraordinary and hopefully in the future avoidable disparities in health in which one population on the basis of their race and ethnicity suffer disproportionately more than others.
Dr. Fauci, I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. It is so extraordinary that a man who is so involved and so much needed in this world right now, at the level you are operating, can take the time out to share with us for this most important award. I won't leave without giving you a final opportunity. If there's anything that you'd like to share, something perhaps we didn't talk about that you think is particularly important, this is your moment, open-ended opportunity to share with us, and we are just so grateful to have you do so.
Well, thank you very much. I think there are two messages. One, this will end, so we should not get too much in despair. And number two, we have highly efficacious and safe vaccines coming along very soon. We're going to have a considerable effort in getting people to appreciate that despite a lot of mixed messages that have come out of Washington, it would be important to get as many people vaccinated as possible, not only for your own health and safety, for those of your loved ones, but also for the country in general. Because if we get the overwhelming majority of people vaccinated, we can have an umbrella of protection over the country that even the vulnerable who are not getting vaccinated or in whom the vaccine does not work will be protected by the veil of protection of the vast majority who have been vaccinated. So that would be my message.
Thank you, Doctor. One last question I do want to ask, and I know you cannot possibly know this answer with any degree of certainty, but when do you think we might be back to a condition that we might describe as being normal life in this country? Or do you think that from now on we will be forever changed to some degree with the way we live?
We may be changed to a little degree, but I think a combination of uniform adherence to simple public health measures together with the deployment widely of a safe and effective vaccine. I think as we get into the early fall, late summer of 2021, we could get back to a considerable degree of normality so that hopefully we'll be able as families and loved ones to celebrate next Thanksgiving and next Christmas in a way that we unfortunately have not been able to do this year.
Well, Merry Christmas to you, Dr. Fauci, and to all of your great work. We are so grateful to have you in the position you're in. And let me just tell you again, there are so many people who hang on your every word. So we are waiting for the next pronouncement from the great Dr. Anthony S. Fauci. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Judge Wynn. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you today.
I would like to thank all of this year's Eleanor Roosevelt Prize honorees for their contributions to advancing human rights and for letting us celebrate these contributions with the Eleanor Roosevelt Prize. A special thank you to the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation, our presenting sponsor, for so generously making these virtual ceremonies possible. Great thanks as well to the team at the ABA Fund for Justice in Education, who have been such stalwart supporters of the Center for Human Rights for so many years. My CHR board colleagues and I are personally grateful to President Trish Rifo for participating in this year's Roosevelt Prize ceremonies and for her superb leadership at the association, and that of her predecessor, Judy Perry Martinez. Their support of CHR has been invaluable and is deeply appreciated, as is the steady hand of ABA Executive Director Jack Rives and his team. And of course, to the talented CHR staff, led by Director Michael Pace, Chief Counsel Brittany Benowitz, Senior Counsel Jenna Anderson, and Senior Program Manager Lana Betas, who rendered the Center's daily human rights advocacy so effective. Last but not least, my thanks to you for watching. To learn how you, too, can be a justice defender and hold governments accountable under law, take a moment now to visit the Center's website at americanbar.org/human rights. CHR is grateful for your support. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you next year.